you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this session. My name is Naoko Ishii. I'm Director, Center for Global Commons, also Executive Vice President for Mr. Fujii. So I today serve a Master of Ceremony for you. First, I would like to invite the President Fujii for his opening remarks.
Well, 皆さんこんばんは。Good evening, everyone. I'm Teruo Fujii, President of the University of Tokyo. Today I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Paul Polman and host his event here at Komaba. And we, as humanity, are now facing unprecedented challenges on a global scale, and one of which is sustainability. And as you know, climate change or climate crisis, biodiversity loss, pollution or degradation of a soil or ocean, all these are the result of the human activities. And that is basically putting so much pressure onto the planet Earth, further beyond, its capacity. So now it's time for us to think about transforming our life, our way of life, so that we can live sustainably within those planetary boundaries. So as you know, our guiding principle of UTokyo, which is UTokyo Compass, and that that was determined last year and released in September 2021. And there also we have put very great emphasis on green transformation, which is called GX. And the role of university working together with multi-stakeholders to address these global challenges. And UTokyo also put emphasis on the dialogue, importance of dialogue between the people with diverse backgrounds and between the universities and the society, and or within the international community. So today's event is, in this context, a very important opportunity for us. And let me briefly introduce Mr. Paul Polman. And as you know, SDGs, which is determined in 2015 by the United Nations. And then that is a kind of compass, so a direction for humanity. And Mr. Paul Polman is the one behind this initiative, and working together with other representatives of business and the CSOs. So he has brought SDGs into life. And not only that, Mr. Paul Polman, as CEO of Unilever, the global company, and he had determined Unilever's business strategy, embracing the whole idea of sustainability, and put it in place. So by doing that, he has created unprecedented forces among non-state actors, and encouraged also governments to play their part. Today, so we have indeed, once again, a great opportunity for all of you, for students and UTokyo colleagues, to learn from Mr. Polman directly about his journey and to think about what we can do. And in fact, you may have some chances to ask also questions to Paul during this session, maybe in the latter half. So I hope you will make a kind of vigorous dialogue with him. So so please join me to welcome Mr. Paul Polman. Please join me. Thank you. I just also would like to introduce Professor Ishii. So Ishii Sensei is moderating this session.
Yeah. Thank you, Fujii Sensei, and then welcome, Paul, and then welcome to the audience. And as the President already mentioned, that we keep the latter half of this session to the direct exchange between you and Paul. So let's keep us then moving forward. Maybe Paul, you may not recall at all that when first we met. It was actually 2013 that at Davos, snowy Davos, and I was just elected as the CEO of the GEF, and I was sitting one of the sessions about how to stop the deforestation, particularly in Indonesia. And then he is leading that alliance, that the Tropical Forest Alliance, and he is leading this entire discussion, creating multi-stakeholder coalition. And in my table, it was joined by HSBC, head of HSBC, then the producers and the consumers, then interestingly, Minister of Finance. It's not Minister of Environment. I think that's the key. And we had a really good discussion, also the CSOs, to how we can come together to stop the deforestation of Indonesia. As this example shows, we really need to come together from various backgrounds, but all important stakeholders to create that coalition. And that's what I think that Paul has been doing for years. And to me, somebody very new to this sustainability, it was so-called aha moment. Then since then, that Paul become my teacher that how to do this sustainability, not only just ideas, but how to create the coalition, how to implement it. So it's a little bit like an imprint of the duck, or in Japanese it's kamo no surikomi, that I'm very much focusing what he has been doing for since then, almost a decade. And so to me, this is a real pleasure to invite him and to create this opportunity for you to directly hear from him and how we can really do it towards this gigantic challenge of the humanity. So I have a few questions, opening questions for him, and we can engage in a more like a conversational style. Paul, you had just traveled to be here with us today from the Bali for G20, then before that, Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27. So I'd like to first ask you, what is your take about these two big international meetings? The reason I'm asking is that in Japan, still I see that there is a sense of hesitation not to move or not to accelerate our movement. And it's more like a wait and see, because we were in the middle of this multifaceted crisis. So that maybe it's better for us to not to move so quickly. Let's see that what's going on. So that is a kind of sense, unfortunately, in Japan. But you may see very differently that are we winning or are we losing? What is your take?
Well, that alone could keep us an hour here. But I first want to thank you, Naoko, for obviously the opportunity, and President Fujii for your kind words and your introduction. I know how busy it is to be a president and to be everywhere and run around, so I really highly appreciate it. But I also want to thank the students, because you're probably one of the most motivated group of students to come here at, what is it now, 7 o'clock at night. If I were your age, I would be in the bar or in the disco. So I admire you for doing that. But and by the way, I don't know if you have many Dutch students, but for people like us, it's very difficult to sit in those chairs. It's definitely made for Japanese. I had a hard time getting in and getting out there. But anyway, I'm sitting here a little bit more relaxed now. No, seriously. So I've worked a long time on many different things, and you mentioned Indonesia and deforestation. We all are familiar with the issues of palm oil. Deforestation in the world is still going up. Despite our short existence in this world, we've already cut down half the world's forests. It's a real problem, because it's one of the key drivers of climate change, which we know is one of the biggest issues that we need to attack. I always felt like running a company like Unilever, which is one of the bigger companies in the world, certainly by the top 50 companies, that if you have palm oil in your products, which you basically find in every product in the world that you sell, from shampoos to soaps to food, and you are then using palm oil that is related to deforestation, you're part of a problem, you're not part of a solution. And the reason we created the Tropical Forest Alliance and worked with all these governments is to find solutions. Otherwise these systems become unsustainable. Because I've actually worked quite a lot in Indonesia, I'm now actively advising President Jokowi, and that's why we were invited to the G20 in Bali last week and had the meetings with all the heads of state. The G20 is an important forum. It was actually G19 because, as you can imagine, Russia was not there. And unfortunately, although the foreign minister showed up for one day, but they were basically not there. But that is 80% of the world economy. So if we don't get them to move, then it's difficult to move the global system. We know, and you all read the newspapers, that it's a very difficult moment for humanity. I think one of the main reasons is that we haven't addressed these basic issues. Everywhere we see inequality going up. We see the limits of these planetary boundaries. We see undermining of trust. A lot of people feeling that globalization is not working for them. Or that we have these global issues like the pandemic, where you see that again the poor or the more disadvantaged suffer disproportionately. And people are becoming more and more concerned about that. And some of the politicians, especially in some of the countries, we've seen an increase in populism, in nationalism, in xenophobia. And in fact, since COVID, in about 100 countries in the world, democracy has gone down, not gone up. And these populist governments, they play on our fears, our concerns. Do we have jobs? Is the next generation going to be better off? Will we be here 2 or 3 generations from now, the way we are going? People are concerned. The issues of mental well-being or mental stress, if I may call it, is going up. So, on the one hand, we have governments that are increasingly looking at their own countries and less willing to work together. Mr. Trump obviously was the prime example of that, of make America great again. I don't think he had a lot of respect for anybody else in the world. And this is at a time that many of the issues that we have, cybersecurity, pandemics, climate change, are actually global issues that need to be addressed. This happens at the same time as the world has changed, and you are a good example of that here. When global institutions were created, it was 1944 in Bretton Woods, but 80-90% of the world's economy was Europe and the US. And these institutions, the WTO, the IMF, the World Bank, etc., OECD, they reflect the world that was there about 70, 80 years ago. It doesn't reflect the world anymore as it is today. So these institutions are not really functioning anymore as much as they should. And yet we need them more than ever to solve these global issues. Then you add to that the planetary boundaries challenges, probably the biggest challenge that we have, where we have been able to lift a lot of people out of poverty. We've been able to create an enormous amount of wealth. Japan certainly a good example of that. But we've done that in a way that frankly is not sustainable anymore. In Japan, World Overshoot Day, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish, is May 6. Every day after May 6, you're actually stealing from future generations. Globally, that date is July 28th, and it's coming forward every year. That puts an enormous pressure on the planetary boundaries. Climate change is one of the results of that, increasingly becoming a more noticeable issue. Increasingly more people suffering from that. increasingly disrupting many countries. You've seen the droughts here, the floodings, and I could go on, the hurricanes. That's just a little signal that Mother Nature is sending us. So to deal with that issue, we have created a process, because people saw it coming a little bit, which is called the COP. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's now in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. We had the COP27, which means that we've already been talking 27 years. Because of COVID, we skipped a year. We've actually been talking 28 years. And despite talking 28 years, with all the countries in the world, we still haven't been able to come together and make an agreement that brings the threat of climate change down. By all means, science tells you that you have to stay below 1.5 degrees warming. Anything above 1.5 degrees is going to be a disaster. Even today at 1.2 degrees, which is where we are already, many people are incredibly surprised with the effects that we already see in our global ecosystem. Much more than we had anticipated 5 or 10 years ago. And many of our systems are very fragile or are close to a negative tipping point. Many of our planetary boundaries we've already exceeded. So the world is in a very precious and delicate state right now. Yet, on the positive side, by all means, study after study, the science confirms, if you believe in science, but the science confirms that we could still stay below the 1.5 degrees, that we could still attack these burning issues if we would work together. So, as the negotiators have been there for 27 years, COP27, they have become a little bit scarred. They sit in a room, they don't see the lights, they negotiate little words on the text or misinterpretations of words, but they have missed the big picture. They've become, I think, farther removed from the realities of the world. So we created at the COP what we call a parallel track, where at the same time as the negotiations are going on, we brought in civil society, we brought in the private sector, we brought in the academics. And they obviously are far more aware of what is going on, and they're putting pressure on the system. So if you look at business, and there are good businesses and bad businesses, I understand that. But there is a big part of business now that says we need to move faster because we're getting too high a cost. There's a big part of society, especially the young people like yourselves, that say we need to do something about it. The Greta Thunbergs of this world and many more. There's the financial market that says, I see too much risk. We need to start internalizing these challenges and hold companies accountable. So having all of these people there, showing what they are doing, often moving forward by themselves already, despite governments not moving, sends a strong signal, makes our politicians hopefully a little bit more courageous. In the G20, which was very important to us, we agreed with the heads of state to make a commitment before the COP was finished that they were committed to the 1.5 degrees. This is very important because there are some countries, countries like Saudi, you can imagine, with the big oil production, that were pushing back. Also some of the bigger countries that were pushing back. Oh, we're not going to make it anyway. We have the wrong target. Why should we do it now? Because my countries have not caused the problem. The other countries have caused the problem. So I should not be penalized. All these discussions are always going on. And the end result is we can simply not afford to move away from the 1.5 degrees. So we use the G20 very effectively to have the heads of state of the major countries say, President Xi Jinping, President Biden, the President of India, presidents of the bigger countries like Brazil actually, or France or Germany. That's what the G20 is, to say we are not moving out of the 1.5 degrees. I think that helped get the agreement in Sharm el-Sheikh this week. In fact, this weekend they had to go on. Separately on the G20, they agreed a global health fund so that everybody has access to health. 50 billion needs to be put on the table, but it will happen. They worked on digitization and how to create something that can work across the world. Many countries have different expectations of that. If you are in China, you think differently about it than if you're in the US. Or if you're in Europe, you might have another opinion. How can we make it work for everybody in a world that is more interdependent? And the third thing they discussed, that we discussed there, was actually sustainability, if you want to, or how to attack some of these tougher issues of climate change or deforestation or natural capital. Indonesia obviously has a lot of that. How to protect the rainforest, that type of discussion. So overall, the G20, I think, was a good success because it was the first time that President Biden and President Xi Jinping met with each other. They had never met each other in person. I was there and I saw them talking with each other. I saw Xi Jinping talking with Modi. They talked at least for 15-20 minutes after we were done with the dinner. And the fact that these heads of state are talking with each other is already encouraging. I also know that as a result of these talks, they have agreed to continue the communication around things like climate change. They clearly disagree on things like Taiwan and some other areas, but they agreed that that should not get in the way of not talking to each other. So that's a very important thing. The second one is that they also agreed with a very strong statement that one country should not invade another country, that we should not be using nuclear weapons. In fact, without using the word Russia, I think the rest of the countries were more aligned that this type of thing needs to stop and that the global economy is paying a high price for that at a moment that we can't afford it because it puts us, it slows down all the other things we need to do, like climate change. So I think the G20 was a big success. If I look at the COP27, I would say it was a moderate outcome. I'm not impressed with it, but expectations were low. I actually wrote an article about it that you can see, that you can read, but we had to manage expectations in Egypt. After Glasgow, which was very well resourced, very good agreements, very strong commitments, we got the war in the Ukraine, we got the Taiwan issue with China and the US not talking to each other. The world got sidetracked. We still were dealing with COVID in many parts of the world. The world got sidetracked. So many countries tried to backslide, as you call it. And ultimately, in Sharm el-Sheikh, they agreed to stay with the 1.5 degrees. Some of the initiatives that we had fought hard for stayed in the end agreement. But at the end of the day, disappointing, because we wanted the countries to show higher ambition at the time that we needed most. And again, our politicians, if I may put it very frank, disappointed us by not having the courage to take these higher commitments. In fact, we need to attack the issues of methane. It's not only coal, but they didn't want to talk about it. They took it out of the text. We need to get nature-based solutions in. We need to change the way we produce food, the way we protect our forests. Again, they watered it down in the text. So I can find 10 things that I think they were going backwards, but then on some of the things, they moved forwards. We have stricter standards, we have loss and damage, that for the first time the rich countries recognize that they have an obligation towards the poor countries. So let's hang on to the things that are positive. It's better to have an agreement than no agreement. Let's not get sidetracked by our disappointments. Let's now work a little bit harder to have a good COP28 next year in the UAE.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for the more than full kind of reporting back to us. It's really, really informative. I was sitting the 2 weeks in Egypt, really looking at what's coming and out of G20. We were very happy 1.5 was kept. Without G20, it was very, very fragile. So that was a great contribution from G20 to the COP process. But I just want to go back to your parallel world. Because despite of those fundamental disappointment, particularly among negotiators, there are some positive things in this parallel world, particularly this business-led, CSO-led, academia-led kind of thing. And one thing which made me a little optimistic is that this time first year, first in the 28 years of COP, that we have a food system pavilion, and actually 3 of them. That the climate COP hasn't really recognized the food system as an issue and opportunity. This year, the 3 food system pavilion, great. And then there, actually, we were talking about that not only recognize the food system is in quite a danger, or it's quite a dire situation, but it's also a kind of opportunity to work on. And you know that I know that you have been leading the Food and Land Use Coalition as a leader, and then maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you see this food system transformation and how we can really push it moving forward.
Yeah, and it needs a transformation. Where to start? Let me start with the macro number that is important. You cannot get to 1.5 degrees global warming if you don't change the way we produce food. This is not just about an energy transition. There are more things that cause global warming. If you eat a lot of meat, it comes from cows. Cows do things in the front and in the back, which is called methane, that is 100 times more potent than climate change, than carbon dioxide. It stays in the air perhaps less long, 100 years, but we don't have 100 years. So it is more, it's a bigger issue. So 75% of the deforestation that we are seeing in this world, which is still going up, comes from our food system, where we produce unsustainably our food. That's a big driver of climate change. So the way we grow food on the land, the fertilizers we use, the unsustainable agricultural practices, the tilling of the land, letting carbon come out of the soil, is a big contributor to climate change. 30% of climate change comes from our food system. Now, what is so exciting to me is that also 30% of the solutions come from food systems. If we would move to regenerative agriculture, if we would restore our biodiversity, stop having losses but bring it back, then that is 30% of the solution. What makes it so it's a 60% swing. So you can understand why it is so important when you talk climate change that you also talk our food and land use systems. On top of that, it deploys most of the people in this world. All the people that are in poverty are monocrop, smallholder farmers. So also from a sustainable development point of view, you cannot solve the sustainable development issues if you don't solve the food issues. It deals with poverty, it deals with women, it deals with land rights or oceans or forests, it deals with indigenous people, it deals with climate change, it deals with conflict, food and conflict, as we've seen in the UK, in the Ukraine. All issues of the Sustainable Development Goals, food runs right through it. Right now, the way we produce food is I need to find a polite word before I'm on camera, but it is out of sight. If you come from Mars and you look at the way we produce food, you think we're a bunch of idiots. We cut down the forests. We keep the smallholder farmers very poor. We don't give enough nutrition to a lot of children in the first 1,000 days, and it's called stunting. We degrade the land. 50% of the world's land is agricultural, is degraded. We waste 30 to 40% of the food as if we don't care. If food was a country, food weight was a country, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter of carbon after China and the US. Then on top of that, when we waste 30 or 40% and keep about 1 billion people in food poverty, going to bed hungry, not even knowing if they wake up the next day. On the other side, we have 2 billion people eating too much, creating the biggest epidemic, diabetes 2, by being overweight or obese. That whole system is broken. It costs us every year, this is the Global Institute of the Commons, it costs us every year to society about $12 trillion. $12 trillion is a lot of money. If we would change our food system and make it sustainable, we don't have to cut down the forest, we pay the smallholder farmers a better wage, we don't waste so much food, we don't talk calories but nutrition and work on the health aspects of it. So you work demand and supply, if you understand what I'm saying. We can turn that in this decade alone easily into a $4 trillion benefit. Now, a lot of companies are interested because if you are now in the food business and you don't do anything, business as usual, then easily 25, if not more % of your profit will be wiped out by 2030. That's why you see food companies getting interested. That's why you see industries coming together and saying we need to attack this. So food and land use systems are probably one of the most important things to change. I would argue also with the highest return of investment if we change that. I won't bother you with all the numbers, but if you have $1 to invest in food and land use, you can get a $12 return. I haven't found any business that tells me they have a better return somewhere else. Few exceptions, but not so much. So what we now need to do is, food did not get on the agenda for climate change, because the climate change people, they were narrowly focused on energy and energy transition. Now for the first time, and they were frankly afraid that if food would come in, that they would not get as much attention on the energy transition. They were their own worst enemies. Now people have seen it, and increasingly with the food summit that we've had, with the work we did in Glasgow, with alliances we formed globally, as Naoko says, now food is on the agenda. Many people called the COP in Egypt the food COP. I think it will be even more on the agenda in the UAE next year. 3 pavilions, the food summit that we've had globally. Now we see many countries making commitments on food, and now it's time for us to translate all of this into specific actions at country level to change the food systems. The difficulty with food, it's very political. I don't have to tell you that. It's a very political thing. And the other difficulty with food, that it's so local. We all eat different things, we grow different things, climates and soil are different in every country. So you can sit here and talk about food, but at the end of the day, it needs to be a bottom-up from everybody, as well as a top-down. So what I'm working on is bringing these coalitions together, so that we look at the whole food chain, helping governments change their policies. Right now we have $1.8 trillion in perverse subsidies that push us into the wrong direction. So if countries say I need to invest money, we say no, you don't need to invest more money, you need to spend the money in the right way. Right now you're driving the wrong behavior. So we're working on those things, and we're putting science-based targets in place for nature. Just like you have science-based targets for climate, you need to have science-based targets for nature. The TCFD and the TCND, and these are coming in now quite rapidly. The most important moment is this year, because we didn't only have the COP now, but we also have something that is called the COP15, which is in a few weeks in Montreal, that deals entirely with biodiversity. And one of the main things that we're pushing there for is that all the countries agree on what we call a new deal for nature. By 2030, protect 30% of the world. By 20 of the land, the oceans, the forests, and have them untouched. That's where wildlife can come back, the fish can grow, the trees can absorb carbon. So the 30 by 2030 is important. The other thing we're doing is having the commitments that by 2030 we should stop nature loss and restore nature. By then, deforestation should be 0. Many countries, Europe being the leader, are putting legislation in place. For example, in Europe now, we got legislation approved that you cannot import anything anymore if it is related to illegal deforestation. Wonderful. We love it, because it forces other countries to put the standards higher as well. So these things are all happening now, but the COP15 in a few weeks' time in Montreal is going to be very important. Now, I'm here in Japan by coincidence, but the Japanese government has not yet signed up to the science-based targets for nature, to the convention, the Biodiversity Convention. There are some other countries that haven't signed up, but I hope by the time I leave tomorrow morning very early to go to the UK, that Japan has signed up.
We have to convince
so
the environment.
After you're done here tonight, write your little notes to the government and tell them that they have to be responsible.
Use power. Yeah, we will do it.
Be an activist.
Actually, yeah, just going back to the food, and one thing I want to add is that we, Japan, has imported 60% of our food from abroad. And through that process, we actually deforested a lot of tropical forests, Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua, and West Africa, but also that through that soybean, the wheat, we also use a lot of fertilizer, and through vegetable importation, we put a lot of stress on water, so that even if we were okay from domestic production basis, that we are not quite okay on the consumption basis. So we need to see that how we can bring that the consumption country and production country together, so that we can create that kind of value chain and see how consumers and producers work together to flip this system. Okay. This is something actually I did discuss with Isabella Teixeira. Yeah. So it's I really had a lot of hope going forward. Because of time, I need to move on to the next question, Paul. This is about global commons and how we can really work together to create the much more effective mechanism to promote the system change. Paul, you mentioned that the current economic system is kind of broken, that we need to fix it. But how we want to fix it? So that one of the problem of current economic system is we really don't have a price on externalities. The government are talking about to put some price on the carbon, but as the Paul briefly mentioned, this is the natural capital. It's just started to work on, but it's much, much harder. So we need to continue to work on to think about how we can flip that system and promote the system transformation. And then you are leading a lot of multi-stakeholder coalition to promote the system change. And I'm a big fan of multi-stakeholder coalition, as you know. But since that I came back from Washington to here, I found it exceedingly challenging to create a multi-stakeholder coalition here in Japan, because as you may know already, that our society is very much siloed, and we have this institutional and mental barrier to get out of this comfort zone to work together with other stakeholders. So I just like to hear from you, Paul, what we need to do to really address this challenge, particularly given a little bit of this Japanese unique culture. And here you have a future generation who will enter into the business, the policy making anytime soon. So what is your message to this audience?
So I think there are two parts to your question, and I'll do them very quickly now. The first one is we have to recognize that these issues that we now have to deal with are of such magnitude that nobody can do it alone. When I was a CEO and we had a 55 billion company, we had millions of people working for us, I alone could not solve the issues of plastics in the oceans, or deforestation, or human rights in our value chains. We were the biggest buyers of vanilla, but in order to get vanilla to be sustainable and equitable, I would have to change whole countries like Madagascar to do that. So CEOs are being held to a big, high standard, but frankly, on these big societal issues, they cannot just do that alone. So increasingly, people understand that we have to form these partnerships that make us do things differently than we did before. Someone very wise once said, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. Right now in our global economies, we are trying to optimize within a system that frankly isn't designed to deliver anymore. So it needs the broader systems change. I actually believe in human beings. There's this book that a fellow Dutchman wrote, which is called Rutger Bregman, and his book is called Humankind. It's actually worth reading. It talks about the goodness of human beings. But if we are so good, how come that collectively we behave so badly? Because we don't have yet a very good scorecard on what we are doing. And the reason is not because we want to. There is no CEO I met who wants more unemployment, who wants more climate change, who wants more people to go to bed hungry. They don't exist. Why then collectively are we behaving in a way that actually makes it worse? It is because of the boundaries that are put upon us. People's behaviors are influenced by their values, how strong a purpose they have, be determined to fight some of it, but ultimately it's the boundaries around us that decide our collective behavior. If the financial market is very short-term, business becomes short-term. That's a boundary. So you need to move the boundary. When I came to Unilever, I stopped reporting quarterly. I stopped giving guidance. I moved compensation systems truly to the long term so that people got the space to behave differently. You move boundaries. One of the boundaries is that we don't value natural capital. You treasure what you measure. As long as a dead tree is worth more than a tree that's alive, we will continue to cut our forests. So we need to put a price on these externalities. Now that we can measure what the costs are, and these costs are increasingly higher, people are more willing to put a price on it. 25% of the world now has a price on carbon or a cap and trade system. We're moving rapidly to implement the Sustainable Standard Board, which moves next to finding return on financial capital to also force companies to look at their human and social or environmental capital, broadening the definition of what success looks like. We see countries moving to a broader definition. You're familiar with Bhutan's National Happiness Index, but there are many people that say this GDP is just not good enough anymore as a measure of success. Look where it has brought us. GDP was invented after World War II by a guy called Simon Kushnek. And when Simon invented it, he actually said, don't use this to measure success. It's only a measure of industrial output. We were, after the war, one of the good things to measure was, are we making more things again? Are the factories going? I know it was important, but that wasn't meant to be a measure of success. He said it doesn't measure income inequality. It doesn't measure the negative externalities. It doesn't measure finite resources. There's a lot of things that are wrong with it. In war, your GDP goes up. If you have peace, you don't produce weapons, your GDP doesn't grow. If I produce more of my factories and pollute the air, GDP goes up because I produce more. But having clean air doesn't show up. Quality education doesn't show up. So all to say, we need to move these boundaries. We need to treasure what we measure. So these are the broader systems changes that we drive. Now, in order to drive these broader systems changes, you can only do that if you work together with a broader coalitions. Because these issues, as I said before, you just can't do alone. So what we did in Unilever was very clearly say, we want to go to sustainable agriculture, but we can't do it alone. We want to solve the issues of plastics, but we can't do it alone. So what are the best coalitions you can form to create tipping points? Sometimes you need to work with governments. Take the issue of palm oil. We needed to get the government of Indonesia and Malaysia. We needed to get the governments in the other countries to say don't import anymore. We need to have people say, I want to finance the transition. It costs money to change things. So we got countries like Norway to make big pledges. We needed the industry together. They were not necessarily aligned, but we needed to get enough people from the industry together. Then we needed technology to start to find out where the fires are, who is doing it. Google Earth or World Resource Institute systems to analyze. Then we need capability building. Who's working with all the smallholder farmers? We needed NGOs to implement things. So it requires these broader partnerships to drive these bigger systems changes. And unfortunately, we were talking that a little bit before coming here. We are all in little silos. Even if we go to universities, we're in little silos. What we now need is people that can work with governments, that can have the social science, understand the economics, obviously, bring in some other skill sets, and become these systemic leaders that can look at these issues and the complexities, understand them, distill it down to some simple actions that move us forward. And they are complex, they're overwhelming sometimes, but more than ever, we need to get people comfortable to operate in that environment. It's really the only way. In our book, Net Positive, you have that book there.
Actually, if you want to know more...
Not a Japanese fashion. It's a better one to read. I'm practicing my Japanese by reading it. But I haven't understood anything yet in it. But I hope it's the same book. It looks the same, but I don't know if it is. But we have 2 chapters that are worth reading. 1 + 1 is 11. How do you form those partnerships? And it takes 3 to tango. Yeah. How do you work with governments and others? Beautiful. And we put some best practice in there. How do you start with shared objectives, clear accountability, work transparently, have feedback loops, put data and measurement systems in place? All these things to make sure that we have these partnerships work for us and not against us. But that's probably the most important thing. So in Japan, I think you have a societal, cultural problem that you don't like to stick your neck out and do everything together. But if you have a crisis like this, we need a few to stick the neck out and say we need to change. There are a few that need to come forward. It works very well when society doesn't change. But a system of consensus, like you have in some other parts of the world, doesn't work when there is a fast change outside to which you need to adapt. So you need some leaders that are strong enough to withstand the attacks that they will be getting, or the criticism from being first. You have a bigger separation between the government and business. Business sort of sees government there and sees business here. That doesn't work anymore. You as business, if I would be in business, you have to form coalitions to tell governments we need to move faster on biodiversity. We need to be more aggressive on climate change. Because if Japan is not a leader, we will be a lagger. And there are only 2 things happening in the world right now. The leaders win, the laggers lose. There is nothing in between anymore. When things change so fast, don't wait for the laws to change. You now have a corporate governance code. You know, if you want to be listed on the primary market, you have the government setting some targets on climate change because they want to be part of this process. But if as a company you just stay in the CSR mode and say, okay, I'll wait for the law and I do the minimum that is needed, you'll never win. With CSR, you never win. CSR is about less bad. But less bad is still bad. It's not even good.
So the
only way you win is to be net positive. If to be a leader and say, how do I restore, repair? How do I become regenerative, restorative? Have a mindset of making things better. No company has achieved that. But now you see more companies saying, I want to restore nature because I depend on it. I want to go to regenerative agriculture to make the soil healthier again because I need it for the future. I want to invest in people and be sure that they have livable wages because I want that loyalty and that motivation. So these people think net positive. And our argument in the book really is the more we get businesses very practically, individually and collectively to move to that net positive area, the better actually you're off. We can now show with hard numbers that companies that move faster in that direction of ESG, of being responsible, actually have a better financial return as well. Companies that have more women and have a better balance have a better financial return now. Companies that have more women on the board, 30% or more, have a better financial return than companies that don't. Companies that more actively reduce their exposure to carbon have a better financial market value than companies that don't. The financial market already rewards you for being better positioned in the future and not be a company of the past. So it makes economic sense. Unilever in the 10 years had a 300% shareholder return. It's not bad at all. We have shown that you can do this, be a leader of it, and also satisfy your shareholders. It's not the only one you want to satisfy, but certainly more and more in the financial market now understand that the best way to get a long-term return is to be part of helping solve these issues, which is a tremendous opportunity. That's what business does. It solves problems. We have more problems, then it also means we have more opportunities. Wonderful.
I think it's time to ask the questions from the audience. So the time is rather limited, but I know some of you really want to ask directly. So could you please raise hands?
Oh,
yeah,
thank you.
Here he is.
and you can ask
you
anything.
You could ask anything, but you
Anything.
could say who you are.
Thank you for your talk. I'm a science student at first year at the University of Tokyo here. And, well, it's a question I've had from before today's session, which is, I think, well, I'm sure that there are many universities in Japan and around the world that, like this university, are working or tackling the problems of SDGs and want their students to work harder on such problems. But is there something special about this university or Japan as a country that brought you here? I'm just curious why the reason why you chose to come here.
Well, I came here because of a different reason. For two reasons I came here. First, well, for three reasons. I used to go to Japan every year, and COVID didn't allow me to, so I was homesick. I actually like Japan. You know, I've been in most parts of the countries here. I was the first foreign CEO that went back to Fukushima after the disaster, when every CEO left. I wanted to be with the Japanese. We do a lot of things here for the country. Interestingly, my son married someone from Singapore, but they live in Japan, so they decided to move here. There's a lot of good things in Japan. Fascinating culture and all that stuff. You're the second reason is you're the third biggest economy in the world. You know, despite deciding not to make love anymore and having babies, you still are very big. You know, I'd have more fun if I were you, but you know, that's for you to decide. But you are an important country. And the third one is, I'm working on another global initiative which I chair, which is called the Valuable 500. There are 1.3 billion people with disability in the world. That's 15% of the world population. But they don't get a fair chance. Even in this country, it's a big problem. And yet they're capable of doing everything. I don't know if anybody saw the television show that we did yesterday with the Nippon Foundation, which was meant to be for the Special Olympics, but it got cancelled. But yesterday night we were there downtown here in Tokyo, and all these artists with tremendous disabilities giving a performance that was better than anybody else. I had tears in my eyes. So Mr. Sasakawa-san, who runs the Nippon Foundation, became a friend of mine, and he invited me and he says, what can we do to drive this higher in Japan? And then I made it coincide with the launch of the book in Japan to have an opportunity to talk to you all. So I'm happy to be here because you have over 30,000 students at the university. It's one of the major universities in the world. You're connected with a lot of other universities. We were talking with the president, and for example, I chair the business school at Oxford, at Side Business School, as one of my other activities. But I'm very keen on looking at how do you change education, because our current education system is stuck in the past in most universities. We don't teach these, we don't create these multidisciplinary leaders, these cooperative leaders that we need, these moral leaders that society demands. Most of the MBA programs in the world produce little Milton Friedmans on steroids. We are teaching people how to optimize return on financial capital, how to kill each other and be win-lose, instead of really what are the leaders that we need right now. So I'm fascinated in that. We've put 865 universities together. I'm on the board of an organization that is called Principles for Responsible Management Education. With our book, we are working with 30 universities very closely with a group of people I've put on that, and to really see if we can accelerate the change of management education. At the end, it needs to come from the young, because you are 50% of the world population is below 30 years old. Well, if you're 50% below 30 years old, you have to be part of the solution. You're more creative. It's your future. You care about it more than a lot of people that are older, clearly. And, you know, and you represent someone that is the most important one to me. That is the future generation. They can't speak for themselves. You guys represent the future generation. So you need to be there. You not only need to have a seat at the table, but you need to be at the table. You need to own the table. And in some cases, we need to move and make space for you. So that is what we did also in the COP. How can we get more young people in? How can we get more young people into leadership positions faster? How can you get a voice in companies which sometimes are difficult to change? In Unilever, I put a shadow board. I had the real board, people with experience, older people, gray hair like me. But we had a shadow board of young people that we said, okay, how would you run the company? What would you do? And we got more ideas from that sometimes than from the other boys. But you have to be, you know, and we have to ensure that the young people like yourselves get a permission to not be shy. If you buy clothes, you want to know if the people that made the clothes are get paid fairly. You want to know where it comes from, if it pollutes the environment. If you buy food, as Naoko says, you want to know if it's related to deforestation or not. So we have to sensitize young people as well. You are the generation that actually gets soon more voting power. In America, we already saw that. The midterm elections were better for the Democrats than normally expected because of the young people. You have the bigger spending power. If you like it or not, this decade alone, $12 trillion of money gets transferred to the millennials or Gen Zs. It's $35 trillion over the next 2 decades. You have the votes, you have the spending power, you have the energy and the creativity. All of that combined, we need to unlock. You need to own it, but you need to take it. You can bring people to the water, but they have to drink. So going to these institutions, and you are very fortunate to be at a very good institution, brings an obligation with itself. Because you are very fortunate to be here, but you are not a reflection of the world population. You belong to 5% of the world population that is fortunate enough to get educated, to be able to find the jobs you like to do, to probably get paid well. Then it is your duty, it is your obligation to start to work for the other 95%, because otherwise the world doesn't function. And that's why we're here. You need to own that, you need to create these networks, and you need to step up to the plate at a time that it's needed most.
I hope we have time. One more question. Anybody? Okay.
Or we can take questions,
okay?
2 or 3, and then I combine them.
Okay, so
because they might be the same question.
All right. Okay, I just got 1, 2, 3, right? Yeah.
So take 3 questions.
Yeah.
So,
Wait a minute.
Tell me where you're from when you ask the questions. Your name and where you're from.
my name is Chen Xin, CHENXING, and I'm from Graduate School of Pharmaceutical Sciences. As an individual living in Japan, I felt that though this country is like well-mannered country, I think, but still there are a lot of people like who are not taking responsibility they are actually facing. For example, I am in the lab every day, but we share a lot of things, but still there are a lot of people who are not like, caring about others, like they just have something just there. So I think the people here today have, noticed the problem we are facing and you're talking about today, but still like the rest of us are not realizing it. So I want to, give some advice for how should we, enlighten those people to get responsible.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so
we'll take very quickly 3 questions.
Yeah, she and him, yeah.
I think there's one here before you in your white shirt.
him,
No?
yeah.
Did you have a question? No. I think I saw 2 hands going up here.
Hi, my name is Julia, and I'm an exchange student from University of Manchester, and I'm currently doing my business back in my home country. And I just want to ask about how to satisfy the shareholder, where the company wants to push the sustainable development. Because as you said, if the company focus on the sustainable development, it will benefit the long-term. The long-term profitability of the company, right? However, I feel like the shareholder, they focus more on short-term profitability. So how can we satisfy the shareholder in short term while push our goal forward?
Yeah, thank you.
Then there was a question here.
Here.
Someone had a hand up. Yeah, you had a hand up. I know it's up here in the front.
Thank you for your talk today. My name is Vedanta Traval, and I'm a third-year student at this university. I'm majoring in environmental sciences. So the majority of the talk today which you presented was mostly about food systems and the transition there. So my question goes back to the fact that a major part of food system transition goes on the fact that we need to change to a more plant-based diet or concentrated plant-based. And at least in today's society, there's a lot of societal image focused on a meat-centric diet. Any ways you personally feel how can we remove this stigma around a meat diet, or how do we bring a societal change? Because even if companies come up with alternatives, even plant-based meats or cellular meats, how do we get society to conform to this or like get more comfortable with such products?
Very good. So question number 1 and question number 3 are combined. You know, how do we get people to do things that they don't do currently? It starts with ourselves. So if you work in the lab or if you are vegetarian and people around you eat meat, don't preach to them. Don't say they're wrong, because they might have other objectives or other things that you don't have. So never judge people, but try with your positive energy and your own things that you're doing, try to show that there are alternatives or make people aware of things. But don't judge. You know, you cannot say you're a climate denier, you're a bad person, and you fight climate change, you're a good person, because we all are different and we might do different things. But it's within your own circle that you can show. Now, innovation does a lot as well in your case, because there is now lab-developed meat. Singapore has just approved it. US has given approval. You can now eat meat because some people like the texture or the taste or whatever it is, that is produced without having all the side effects of animals. You can actually turn meat that is a problem right now into a positive. I have a farm in the UK that I run because I want to learn about how I moved to regenerative agriculture. But we are feeding 300 cows that we have there, and we can see an 80% reduction in their methane. And cows are actually, if you move them around, are actually very good to regenerate soil. Because when they go in and they actually, without tilling, you can get your soil to be much healthier. And you actually capture, we're trying to show that, you capture more carbon as a result than the little part that you can't solve yet in the cow itself. So technology is an answer. I chair a company that is called Live Kindly, that is an alternative to chicken. It's the Live Kindly company, it's called. And it's basically based on yellow peas. It's growing extremely fast because it tastes the same as chicken and it's significantly healthier. I won't do the advertising here for it, but you have to provide with innovation. You have to provide solutions, be it the methane reduction in the cow, be it the taste of chicken, or be it laboratory-grown meat. And if you provide a lot of these solutions to these challenges, this is what business does. That's why we're there. That's why I keep saying it's a wonderful opportunity. For businesses that understand that, they will solve these problems. It's just that we are running out of time, so we need a lot of people to do it. So how do you get capital to flow there? How do you ensure that venture capital provides support for that type of segment? Fortunately, that's still happening. Despite the global market having collapsed and the economy, I still look at where money goes from venture capital, and it goes exactly into these areas. With people, I have always found myself is that you enlarge your circle of influence. You get people that you find like-minded. You go together, and your circle of influence grows again. You not only explain what you do, but you act what you say, and your circle of influence grows again. There are 10 million things that we can do, and then people start to see around you, yeah, it's not so bad. A lot of people think that if they live more sustainably, that they have to compromise on something. It's not true at all. There are a million things you can do without compromising on anything, and that's what we need to show. Which gets me to the second question, because some people still think it's a trade-off. Of course there are some trade-offs sometimes. There's trade-off between short-term and long-term. But every business has always dealt with that. I've made, Unilever had 570 factories. We were building 10 factories every year. But that's a long-term decision because they only pay out in 5 or 10 years when I fill the factory. We had to go into new countries like China. It might take out 10 years. We invested in training. Might take 25 years before we have the next CEO. So we are willing to make trade-offs. We don't say we don't do it because we want to give it to the shareholder. Some companies do, by the way, and they go bankrupt. We can show you that. But companies think multi-stakeholder. They want to be around longer term. In Japan especially, 40% of the companies in Japan are over 100 years. 40% of all the companies in the world that are over 100 years old are in Japan. So you already have this feeling of community and the social responsibility. But we're used to make trade-offs. We're used to deal with these dilemmas or dichotomies. That's why you are a CEO. So why not include as part of that decision the future of humanity? It seems so logical to me. So that is sometimes you need to invest. In Unilever, sometimes I had to invest in changing our energy systems to green energy. So, by the way, I never had more than a 3-year payout. So it wasn't that big of an investment. But at that time, I would say, Well, I have a little bit of savings in this part of the business. I use part of the savings this time to invest there, to help smallholder farmers convert to sustainable palm oil. We were spending 60 million a year on that. I think it was well spent because I was saving our supply. I was creating livelihoods. I was making the world a little bit better. I thought it was a good investment in humanity. But you know, other times you might say, my brands need more support, and I invest a little bit more in my brands to make them stronger, or do a little bit more in innovation, or introduce brands in more countries. So you always deal with these challenges. It's not different. The financial market is not short-term. There are parts of the financial market that are short-term that we are overreacting to. The bulk of the financial market is institutional funds. These are your or my pensions that need to have good returns in 30 years from now. But increasingly, these parts of the financial market understand that it's not only about good returns, which you can only get if you run sustainable business models, but it's also about creating the world that you can retire in. And we are at a point now, I think, to finalize your question, that the discussion is less difficult to bridge because we have waited so long to attack the issues that the cost that we are incurring is now higher than what it would cost us to avoid the issues. So even the financial market, even the die-hard capitalists who want a return on their capital as their only priority, we can now probably convince most of them, easier than ever before, that it is good to have the right people, that it's good to have a more diverse organization. It's good to pay people well. It's good to have sustainable sourcing, because all of that is actually driving profit. My final sentence, literally final sentence, in COVID, which is a direct result of destruction of biodiversity. You agree with that? It's a zoonotic disease. SARS, Ebola, Zika, Asian flu, now COVID. There's another 4 or 5 waiting around the corner, by the way. Don't be surprised. In fact, the surprise should not have been COVID. It's no surprise to me at all. It was a little bit more nasty than any other thing we've dealt with, but wait what's coming. This direct result of destruction of biodiversity. The cost of COVID in Europe and the US alone, until now, and we're nowhere solved the rest of the issue, the cost has been $17 trillion to save lives and livelihoods. $17 trillion. $17 trillion is infinitely more than implementing all of the Sustainable Development Goals. What we're asking for biodiversity is to have 750 billion a year only I'm saying, spent on regenerating nature, restoring nature, and spending money. So you spend 750 billion to save 17 trillion. It's a no-brainer. I'm surprised that not more people jump on it. So we have to make people aware of it. We have to provide solutions. That's why this book, and this is my last spiel for the book, it's a how book. It's not a theoretical why book. It's not a consultant book either. It's really to help people. We know where the issues are, so we don't spend much time on that. Most books spend 90% of the time admiring the problem. We just go straight into, this is how, as a company or as an individual, you can actually attack these issues and solve them. And it's probably the biggest business opportunity of the century that we have. This is a book of hope. This is a book of opportunity. This is ultimately a book of bringing humanity back to the world.
And for young leaders.
It definitely is for young leaders. If I were young, I'd read it twice. Because it really is probably the best stimulator of your career. I think no university can provide you with so much knowledge for free as we have put in the book.
Great. Thank you, Paul, for this exchange. And now the time has been really approaching. So I actually, before I clap the hands, that we would like to invite President Fujii for his reflection of listening to this conversation, and also would like to hear from him at his take, how he want to change the university.
Right.
If he is
we will stay here because we don't fit there.
Yeah.
So, yes, by the way, thank you so much for a very, inspiring message. So, for me, it is, so I'm always saying that in this, ever-changing world. And everything we took for granted is, being fluctuated or being questioned anyways. So that as universities, so we are academia, so we also need to take a long-term, view from the past to the future. But at the same time, as it has been already discussed a little bit, but by also breaking silos with the conventional disciplines that we have. So of course we keep those disciplines, but at the same time we need to think about how we could break those silos. So for that we are now, so I put the name for that, that is, it's not really a kind of nice name, but so we would like to build a kind of new model of the university. And that is being more sensitive to the kind of society's demand that is directed to academia too. And then for doing that, in the Tokyo Compass, we basically emphasizing the importance of dialogue, as we have here. So the dialogue is not just having those chat or exchange information and so on, but basically we like to share the question, and then like to think about know what is unknown, or to together to think about, to together share the question, and then to think about how to solve it among the people. So that is a kind of very important, action as also sort of scholars to be able to know something unknown. So by having those practice of dialogue, we could also at the end to share the common questions and also hopefully the solutions. And then at the end, if we could also build up a kind of a trustful relations in between, that is a kind of very nice, outcomes from the dialogue. In this kind of way, we would like to, as university, we like to, and also you could also contribute to the kind of global, public good. So that's the way how we would like to make all this university a better place, and then where anyone else also in the world would like to join. So that's, and then you yourself would be also taking a lead for this kind of activity. And then that is also leading to the kind of solution to all these global challenges. So that is my wrap up. And then before to close off the session, once again I'd like to thank Mr. Paul Polman for your time today. And then it is really a great time. And then I hope this experience will be also memorized deeply in their minds. So once again, please join me to thank you.
So, thank you everyone for staying so late, and then I hope that you can take a lot of lessons out of it and let us implement ourselves and own it, the solutions. Thank you so much. Have a safe evening.